violins of autumn wound my heart with a monotonous languor.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Today at 1, we're live in Ukraine as Russia invades in a major military assault by land, sea and air.
It's now more than a month since the US Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan. China's ambassador to Australia also issued a blunt warning a few days ago that those who push for Taiwanese independence will be punished.
We're waiting for a peaceful reunification, but we cannot rule out other options.
You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore.
Welcome to Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight, the show where we speak to those on the front lines of defending democracy around the world. New episodes drop every Friday, and if you enjoy this program, then I do have one favor to ask of you. If you can think of just one other person who you think may enjoy it as well, may find value in it, a friend, colleague, or family member, then share it with them and tell them why you like it. With your help, we can help get these vital stories out to more and more people. Also, don't forget to check out the rest of my work on the Dictators v Democrats YouTube and Substack channels. If you want to support my work, then paid subscribers to Substack and Patreon get access to Why We Fight 1 week early. With all of that said, let's find out why they fight. Welcome to Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight. In this episode, we're turning to Iran, which has, for deeply unfortunate reasons, been in the news an enormous amount recently, and you should all be knowing this unless you've been blessed in living under a rock. I'm speaking today with Zolal Habibi, an Iranian human rights activist and an international advocate for democracy in Iran. She's also a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, an organization which has been fighting for Iranian democracy for decades. Zolal, very glad to have you join us today.
Thank you for this opportunity. Please allow me to greet all those who are tuning in to the program today. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to be able to echo the voice of the people of Iran.
So we tend to get started in these programs with a little bit about yourself. You've been on this journey for some time now. How did your activism, your fight, your struggle start?
Actually, for me, I think that it's always been a part of my life in a way, because I'm from the generation that was born after the revolution, and from the onset, I was introduced to the human rights situation in Iran, what is going on. And despite having not had the possibility to actually visit Iran, I was born and raised in the US, but I could literally say there hasn't been a day in my life that has not been tied into the plight of the people of Iran and what is going on there. I think I went to my first demonstration when I was 3 days old, and it is still continuing. And I remember meeting people who were victims of torture when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and that really shaped who I became, because I had all these experiences and role models in front of me. They became my childhood heroes. Because I saw people who had been through, unbelievable circumstances, but they prevailed and they continued and they tried to, they never gave in or gave up, but they continued to stand. They didn't say we've done our part, let everyone else do their part now. And that resilience, that was something that I saw firsthand. And there was a time that I thought, well, that's in Iran and we're here, we're safe. But that all also changed when I was 7. When I was 7, my father was killed by the Iranian regime. And that summer, the Iranian regime had 30,000 political prisoners executed in Iran in 5-6 weeks. So it wasn't just a turning point in my personal life, it was a turning point in our history of Iran. And but even then, I still saw, I still considered myself to be one of the lucky ones, because I knew so many others who had much more difficult situations. Like I had friends who, like for instance, when they were 5 or 4, they had been arrested and taken to prison with their parents, and as a method of torture, the regime would make them watch their parents be tortured. And I have a friend who, to this day, she remembers that, at the age of 5 or 6, she was the only person in every prison who was walking around without a blindfold. So everyone knew, like, she was the one who was actually seeing these scenes of, all these people who've been tortured and they're just sitting on the ground in the hallways waiting for to be taken in again. Like these scenes are something that it's very rare for anyone to have witnessed it. Everyone knows, like they can imagine how it was because they had blindfolds and this was their own situation. So they figured everyone next to them in this hallway had the same situation, but she's the one who actually saw it. So, I mean, those are things that don't get erased from your mind. And I didn't have to deal with that. So despite having had lost my father, I always considered myself to still be one of the lucky ones. And I felt like I had a responsibility, even as a child, to be the voice of, other kids like myself inside of Iran. And I think that really shaped who I became. And I think it also changed my perspective on a lot of things. I mean, maybe a lot of things that, seemed trivial for people my age, they weren't that, important in my life, because I was like, that's not a major, issue. There's so many other, focal points that you could concentrate on in life. And so that was like part of what I grew up with. And yeah, and I remember, from childhood, like thinking of the fact that, knowing all of this brings responsibility. Like, what is your role? What is your responsibility? And not to be, passive, and not to just be bystander. And I think that I remember, I think from the age of like 12, going to walking through the halls of Congress, trying to gather like support and signatures from members of Congress, and try to like brief people about like, this is what's going on in Iran. And as I grew up, that sense of responsibility just it was always with me, and I always felt like there has to be something more that I can do. Fast forward, when I graduated from high school, I was on my way to go and study medicine. I had gotten a full scholarship and everything. And that summer, in July of 1999, student uprisings broke out in Iran. And it was the first time after over a decade that we were seeing nationwide uprisings in Iran. And it was also the first time that this was being broadcasted, because it was the start of cable television and cable news networks and CNN and whatnot. So the world was seeing this for the first time. And I remember watching those scenes of, the students being attacked, being thrown over the buildings by suppressive forces, and thinking, what is your responsibility? What are you going to do? Are you just going to be watching as a bystander, or are you going to do something about it? And I remember thinking that, I can't. I just can't just sit around and watch. I need to be part of that process, to be able to bring, an end to all of this destruction and death and, everything that the crimes perpetrated by this regime. And I decided to join the resistance at that point. I remember back then, about a year before that, actually, there was a magazine back then in the US. It was a Farsi magazine. It's called Javan and the Youth. And in it, there was an article, and it was speaking about, the brain drain from Iran. And it said at that time there were 20,000 Iranian doctors in the US. Right now I think it's probably like 3 or 4 times that number. But I remember that day when I was making that decision, I thought, are you going to be one of those 20,000, or are you going to be one of those who frees Iran so these 20,000 can actually go and serve their own people? And yeah, the journey started then, and today we are 26 or almost 27 years later, and this fight is still continuing. And generations after generations, people have made that same choice to resist, not to give up, not to give in, and to fight. And I think that's what one of the things that sets maybe Iran apart from a lot of countries is the fact that despite living under tyrannical rule, I mean, the current theocracy, and before that, the monarchy, which was also a dictatorship. So, I mean, in the last century, we've had like 2 years of a democratic government in Iran in 100 years. So, but what's important is that the people of Iran have never given into it, and they have continued to resist. And I think that is what's important, because very easily, I mean, Khomeini and like the system that he put together could have ruled over Iran for like 500 years. If you look at history, that is how like theocracies are able to rule. But the fact that right now, I mean, yes, it has been a long journey, but the fact that when you look at it through the lens of history, like that aspect of it, it's on the brink of falling apart at 47 years now. And I think that is to a great part because of the price that the people of Iran have paid and the continuous resistance that they've had.
And what's been your main method of struggle, the focus of your work? People like yourself, resistance fighters, freedom fighters, there are so many different tools in the arsenal, and I'm wondering what's been yours.
I guess different times call for different methods, and just different avenues. There's a lot that needs to be covered. So I guess throughout the years, depending on like what was the main focus of what we needed to concentrate on, it's been on different arenas and areas. Currently, I am working at the, as part of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, working a lot with both lawmakers, the media, but also like youth activists and whatnot. So organizing that. So it's just different fronts, just based on what is needed. I guess in recent years, it has been more raising awareness, but also raising pressure on the regime, or, trying to, I guess, keep the pressure up, and to be able to convey the message of the people of Iran.
This struggle, I mean, like you said, 47 years, it's a very long one and a very difficult one. And I'm wondering, is there a moment in your personal struggle for freedom, for your country, where you felt proud, where an achievement that comes to mind?
Well, there have been a lot of those moments, and the moments of pride aren't necessarily always from achievement, but maybe it is an achievement in the sense of, like, for instance, a value or a value that is being set forth. Just the latest, I guess, maybe if we look this week, on Monday and Tuesday of this week, 4 political prisoners were executed within 2 days. And when you hear their messages, when you read their letters, because all of this is now surfacing after they've been executed, because before that it would, it had very high risk to even, show these or share these. You can see the sense of pride among Iranians that a country that has people like them, that is the willpower that's going to bring down this regime. And that is why the regime feared them so much, that had to turn to execution to have them eliminated. I think that they serve as symbols, as role models for the Gen Z of Iran. You know, some of them, like their stories, each one of them, when you look at it, like one of them, Mohammad Taqavi, he was 12 at the time of the revolution. So he went to school and everything after the revolution, really. And at the age of 17, he was arrested by the regime. He was imprisoned and tortured severely for 3-4 years. He was one of the sole survivors of the 1988 massacre because they had nothing on him. He was had been arrested, and he was pretty young compared to, I mean, all of the prisoners at that time. When you look at the list of those who were executed in 1988 massacre, it's very rare to find someone who's above 30 among those who have been killed. But so he was one of the sole survivors of that massacre, but he never gave in, and so he continued his activism throughout all the years. He was arrested again, imprisoned for 3 years, then released, and then arrested again, imprisoned for 2 years, and now he was executed. But the regime tried to get this video is really going viral. They have English subtitles on it too. The regime tries to spread fear in society. They air these things that they call interviews, but it's actually part of the interrogation, that they do, and it's forced confessions, right? So in that forced confession, he's like, yes, when I was released, I went and reconnected to the resistance, and I was arrested. And if I get released today, I will go and do that again. In face of like the person you're going to be put under torture for saying that, but saying that and standing by it, that, speaks volumes. And people in Iran know the meaning of that, because maybe a lot of people don't have the clear image of like what that means in Iran, because you may think of interrogation of what we see like in the West. It's very different. I mean, in Iran, it's with torture. It's with, solitary confinement and, methods of torture that are beyond a human being's imagination. Or yesterday, they had an 18-year-old executed who was arrested in the protest in January. And the fact that the regime fears them so much that it has, even in the midst of war, there have been over 600 executions since the beginning of January until now in Iran. So I think those all speak for themselves. So those are like certain times that, you take pride in your people and what is going on. But there have also been a lot of victories too, moments of, that you've seen, that you've been able to do the impossible, make the impossibles possible. And I think that that is one of the things that we have seen a lot as a resistance. I've had the privilege of growing up with a role model. Her name is Maryam Rajavi. Maryam Rajavi is the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, but she's also a trailblazer when it comes to women's empowerment and like the whole movement that she has created, like basing a lot of our fight on human values and moving forward with those values, even if they're not popular at times. And just standing by your morals and your values and paying the price for that. And that is what gives you strength to stand so decisively in every scene. She has truly made impossibles possible throughout these years. Her motto is "We can and we must." And I grew up with that motto since I was like 12. The first time that I heard her say it, I was 12 years old. And that was when she was announcing that within the resistance, the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, they were changing the entire system of leadership. So the entire leadership council were now women, like 24 women who had been chosen to lead this movement. And that's where I heard her say that for the first time. She said, "We can and we must extend this line, like these 24, extend this line all the way to Tehran, because the women of Iran are that force for change." And I remember hearing that at 12. And I grew up with that, seeing, personally experiencing these women and seeing how they lead and how they're able to make impossibles possible. And so growing up, I realized at one point that I don't have a lot of the glass ceilings that other girls my age did, like in high school, or when there wasn't anything that I thought a woman can't do. But even though people had those mindsets because of like society, but I had in front of me, like I had seen women who were commanders in the military, commanders in every possible scene, in the political arena, everywhere. And so I was like, there isn't anything that women can't do. But that wasn't a given in society back in like the 1990s or whatnot. And even till today. And there were also times that everyone thought we've accomplished things that everyone thought were impossible. Like for instance, in 1997, as a goodwill gesture to the Iranian regime and as part of the policy of appeasement toward Iran. Unfortunately, just a background, the main victims of the policy of appeasement toward Iran have always been the Iranian people, and the main bargaining chip at the table of these negotiations has always been the Iranian resistance. So the price for that policy of appeasement has always been paid by us directly or indirectly. So as part of that policy of appeasement, it was 1997, Khatami, who was supposed to be a moderate, was brought into office in the regime to be able to really buy time for the regime at that time. And he had this, dialogue of civilizations and like these ideas or whatever. It was all just to try to say, well, after Khomeini has died, maybe there is some kind of reform inside of the system. Like some people hope right now, after Khomeini has died, maybe there will be some kind of reform in the system. It's not going to happen. And viper never gives birth to a dove. That's clear. Yeah. But at that time, unfortunately, the U.S. State Department in October 1997 placed the Iranian resistance movement, the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, NCRI, and all of them on the terrorist list. Back then, it was just like a political stunt. There was no I think there were like 12 organizations on that terrorist list at that time, and it didn't include Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah or any of that. So it was just like, no one took it seriously. They knew it was like just a political, act for the regime. But unfortunately, things changed after September 11th, and terrorism just took just a completely different dimension. And the Iranian resistance started working to try to delist itself, and everyone thought it was impossible. Like every person that you took this case to, they're like, that's impossible to do. It's never been done. It's never going to get done. And you just, after the fall of the regime, you guys will be delisted, because there's, it was a political stunt. It'll be removed. Even Nelson Mandela was removed from the same terrorist list after he had won the Nobel Peace Prize, after everything. And when he was going to come and speak at the US Congress, they realized that he's still on the list, and so they removed his name. But our movement, with dedication and steadfastness and standing by its values, was actually able to delist, first in the UK, then in the EU, and then in the US in 2012. So it took 15 years, but we were able to do that. Throughout these years, one of the other times that stands out to me is the safe transfer of the members of the Iranian resistance who were in Iraq to third countries. Back in 2015, it was completed, but at the time they were being targeted and attacked constantly by the regime. So the international community was like, well, you need to, try to get them out of Iraq in that situation. But no one was willing to take him in because they feared the retaliation by the Iranian regime. And through an international campaign that was launched by Mrs. Rajavi, and it took years, but we were able to accomplish that. And every single person was transferred without any harm being any harm to the people who were being transferred. And I think that at the time was a miracle, to be honest. And the Iranian regime tried till the last minute to try to do whatever they can to, have as many of them as they can eliminated before they're able to leave Iraq. So we have seen a lot of things like that throughout the years. But I think one of the other, maybe points that really sticks out to in my mind these days is, the strategy that this resistance has been able to push forward. Since 12 years ago, the leader of the Iranian resistance introduced a strategy which we call resistance units, forming, units, group of people who work together underground. They're local in their areas of wherever they are in Iran. Some are as small as 2-3 people, some are like 20 people in one unit. And they really serve as, those beacons of hope for people in Iran, keeping the flame of resistance alive. But they're also the ones who are carrying out, spreading resistance throughout, society.
What is spreading resistance? What methods are they going to be using there?
They do two things right now. In different times and throughout the years, we've seen it, evolve. It was first, just, really small efforts, and then it's grown extensively. So they do work in different areas too. I mean, aside from what I'm going to explain, they also, like, for instance, in times of need for the people of Iran, they're the ones who come to the aid of the people. Like, for instance, in floods or in natural disasters, or even right now in the war, Ms. Rajabi has called out on all of them to try to attend to those who, are the civilian victims of the war right now. But their work is mainly concentrated on two things. One is raising awareness in society, and the second is targeting centers of oppression of the regime. So they're really actually like the pioneers leading the uprisings. And you see their role in the uprisings that we've had in the last decade in Iran. In the last decade in Iran, we have had 4 major uprisings in Iran, and you see it evolve like step by step each time. But one of the things that stood out this time around in January that a lot of people touched on, they kept on saying you could see the element of organized resistance in the protest. Like, there were these people who were leading the protest. They were telling people, like, this is what we need to do now. This is the direction that we need to, work in. This is how we need to organize. This is how we need to protect one another, stand with one another, and whatever. You could see it in some of the videos that also were sent out. So that was like the role that they do play. But also, one of the things that in the uprisings people said this time, they said, first of all, you could see hope in people's eyes. And the second is people felt like they knew what they were supposed to do when they came to the streets. And they're like, we don't know why, but we just automatically knew, like, for instance, you have to try to disarm the suppressive forces instead of being on the defense. We need to be on the offense. And those were things that they had continuously seen it in front of them because of the activities of the resistance units. And I guess in times of like emergency crisis or whatever, that is like, that adrenaline rush that comes to you, you get, you're like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do right now. But like, for instance, just to give you an example, in the last year, they carried out 13,000 awareness campaigns throughout Iran. So just if you divide that by 365 days in a year, that's quite a lot. So everywhere you are in Iran, you come face to face with that. And then on the other hand, they carried out 4,092 operations targeting the centers of repression, be it with armed resistance in some form and shape. It might be a cocktail, it might be whatever, but to try to be on the offensive against the regime, or like specifically targeting the centers of oppression. It's not just, general. And even during the uprising, they carried out 630 operations, which a lot of them were targeting these centers of repression. Some of them were, getting detainees released, things of that nature. And that really set the tone for the uprisings. in Iran. So that is like the type of work that the resistance units do. Unfortunately, in the uprising this time around, 2,000 members of resistance units are currently missing. We don't know exactly if they have been detained or if they have been killed. Some we do know that they've been detained, and I mean that is, or some who have been killed. That is clear. But 2,000 are currently, it's not clear what anything about their whereabouts. But it also shows you how extensive this is, and that is the charge that the regime has had these 4 people executed for this week. And I guess it also sends a signal.
Faced any threat from the regime?
Excuse me?
Have you ever faced any threat from the regime?
Well, I think that constant threat is always there from the regime against this movement. I mean, and I think that's something that we've seen from like day one. I remember back in the 90s when the regime had a freer hand. Unfortunately, like 2 of my father's colleagues, for instance, were assassinated in Rome and in Switzerland by the regime. They were people that I knew personally, and it was right after, it was like 1, 2, 3 years after my father's death. So I remember like the effect or impact it had on me, but we understood that that was always the risk of being a part of this movement. The regime has tried to carry out terrorist attacks or plots against this movement. Even like, for instance, our annual gathering in Paris in 2018, they tried to detonate a bomb there. So 100,000 people were in attendance. If that had actually happened, it would be the largest terrorist attack on European soil since World War II. Fortunately, it was unfoiled. And, you know, Mrs. Rajavi, for instance, she is the #1 target of Iran's assassination attempts and terrorist attempts. And unfortunately, it's not even limited to members of this movement. Like, for instance, Mr. Alejo Vidal Quadras, who was the former vice president of the European Parliament. There was an attempted assassination on him. I think in November, it'll be 2 years or 3 years now. And he miraculously actually was able to stay alive. They shot him through the jaw, and it came out of like the other side of his head. But fortunately, they were able to save him. And the only reason was because he does support this movement. So it has even gone to, you know, targeting supporters of this movement, political supporters. So that has always been a reality. And I think that that is also one of the reasons a lot of like Iranians in the diaspora, they may support this movement, but a lot of them might not even show it because they're out of fear for their own lives and how it will impact their lives, but also fear for their families inside of Iran. Because, you know, being a part of the actual resistance, like the National Council supporting the National Council of Resistance of Iran or the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, it comes with a price. 120,000 people have been executed for supporting this movement in Iran in the last 45 years.
And you've spoken a lot about the role of women in your movement. Why does the regime seem to fear women so, do you think? And do you face any difficulties from potential partners or from any barriers that, you know, come from being a woman struggling for democracy in a country like Iran?
Well, first of all, to answer the first part of your question, Khomeini, from the onset, he knew that he needed something to be able to get his grip on society. So by putting in place these misogynist rules of the regime, and what is the difference between the Iranian regime and maybe other governments who are misogynist? is the fact, or like fundamentalist, is the fact that it's written into law in Iran. In a lot of other countries, it's instilled in society. It's just like your mindset, but you know, being written into law makes the difference. So Khomeini implemented these misogynist, you know, laws on the women of Iran, because if you are controlling half of society, then you're able to control all of society. And if you're able to interfere in the most personal aspect of people's lives, that is when it becomes like it goes from being a classical dictatorship to a dictatorship that has an ideology behind it. So it's that theocracy that comes together. So women have been the #1 target of the regime from day one, practically. And the first, you know, major demonstration that we see against Khomeini is in regards to women's rights. So the women of Iran have never, you know, just succumbed to these situations, and they've always tried to find ways, turning everything in a way to a method of resistance. Like for instance, in Iran, if you look at the statistics in the last 2 decades, there have been more female college students than male. It's not because there's like a positive discrimination for women. It's because women see it as a form of resisting against a regime that doesn't wants to, you know, push women into the home. So they see it as a way of resisting. They see it as a way of, you know, countering that regime. You see it in, I mean, I think the world saw it in 2022 and 2023 after the death of Mahsa Amini, who was killed by the Iranian regime for malveiling, and you know, the whole movement that started back then and that uprising. For a lot of, you know, the world, it was something new, but to us, it was a very actually logical step in the whole process, because as I mentioned, the Iranian resistance, this is something that's very important, and it doesn't, we don't even talk about it as much as we should, because we are so involved in the day-to-day issues that we have. You never have really time to go into this, the more humanitarian or the more, I guess, more theoretic aspects of things. In 1985, like beginning of 1985, the Iranian resistance back then, like the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, MEK, they used to do like an annual analysis of everything that they had done in the previous year, you know, and during that, when they were coming up with that analysis, they realized that in the prisons, in the front lines of this fight against the regime, women are playing an extraordinary role. And not only are they faced with harsher situations, like in prison or whatnot, because the regime had like this hatred toward women who defy it. So you're both a political prisoner and you're a woman, so it just makes it, you know, double that hatred that they had toward them, and like the methods of torture that they would use against them and things. But also in all the other fronts, you saw women stepping it up to the plate to take on responsibility, even though they had to overcome a lot of, you know, the gender biases that exist in society. I mean, a family was more likely to allow their son to go and join the resistance than their daughter, you know, automatically. And so they saw that, but then they realized that in leadership roles, that is not showing through, that these women are the ones who are, you know, they're vanguards in this fight, but they're not present in the leadership levels of this movement. And so that is when the resistance decided to like change that. And so Mrs. Rajavi became the co-leader of the movement at that time. She was chosen by the Central Committee at that time as like someone who was very fit for that responsibility. And when she came, she didn't limit it to herself, because like, I mean, if you look, we have in different countries, we've had some very successful women heads of state, be it from Angela Merkel to Margaret Thatcher or whatever. But it's usually like it's a woman that goes in a male dominant world and becomes like them. She is a woman, but she's following in that same footsteps. You know what I mean? But that's not what Mrs. Rajavi is. So she started changing like the system and the mindsets, and she kept on, taking the hands of like different women and bringing them up and showing them the ropes, like, and showing everyone else like this disbelief that they had that look, women have this capability and this potential, and they could lead very well, and they could change the whole system and the mindset too, simultaneously. And so people started, realizing that, hey, we are supposed to be a progressive movement, then we can't have these gender biases ourselves. So it became like an internal issue first. You can't fight with Khomeini if you still have some of the same, same mindsets when it comes to gender biases toward women. So that became like a whole thing in our movement. And so we saw it evolve. And then in 1993, we had the entire leadership council become women. And then, step by step, that has, gone. And right now, I mean, if you look at all the secretary generals of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran since 1989 till today have been women. And if you look at like the last elections that they had, the secretary general and all of her, I guess, VPs, I guess you could say, if you look at them, the deputy secretary generals, they're all from the generation from like the younger generation. So they're in their 30s or early 40s, and they have also stepped up to this place. So this movement, that there are people in it who have been fighting against both dictatorships for like 60 years, is that 60 years since the formation of this organization. But there are people who, for like a half a century, they've been in this fight, and they're accepting the hegemony of like these women who could be their, I guess, children or grandchildren, but that is something that is really shows like this, the progressive mind thought, the thought process of this movement. And I think that is something that is something that we don't speak as much, but I think you see it bear fruit in Iran society today, with the role that women and the Gen Z of Iran are now playing in every aspect of it.
I want to move on to current events. We're doing an interview about Iran in April of 2026. We have to talk about the war. Do you think that this war is going to help or hinder your movement?
Well, I think that from day one, not from the beginning of the war, but for actually over 2 decades, we have always said that the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement, because positive appeasement is finally going to lead to a war. We have been warning about that for decades. But democracy can't be installed through a war and with bombs over the head. The Iranian regime, and this comes from, it's not just the issue of like values or anything. You have to understand the nature of this regime and the geopolitics of Iran in general, and the history of Iran too. I mean, everything, geography, everything. If you have to take all of those into consideration. So in Iran, in the last 100 years, all the regimes that we've had, they've been installed. So Reza Khan, he was brought in through coup d'etat by the British. When he wasn't serving their interest anymore, they had him removed and put into exile, and his son was, replaced him. At the beginning, he didn't have like his foot on the power. So, we were able to have for 2 years like a democratic prime minister, but Dr. Mossadegh, when he nationalized Iran's oil, that wasn't to the benefit of the West, and so there was a coup d'etat by the CIA and MI6, and Dr. Mossadegh was taken out, and then the Shah was reinstated. And since then, he ruled with the iron fist and the Savak and everything. Then the people of Iran revolted in 1979. But unfortunately, that was also hijacked. Why? Because it was the Cold War era. The final months, everyone was realizing that, well, the Shah is not going to be able to stand. And the Western powers started thinking, what's going to replace it? And how is that going to play in the, Cold War situation? Because Iran plays an important geopolitical role, and it was neighboring the USSR. And so they figured, well, those who are creating this revolution are like progressive movements, and we don't know where they're going to align themselves with. So maybe Khomeini would be to the benefit because he's a, fundamentalist and religious, so-called religious person, and he's opposed to the USSR. And the people of Iran have been paying the price for that for 47 years now. The difference also between a classical dictatorship and a theocracy like we have, or this comparison today would be like Venezuela and the regime. The difference is that in those circumstances, when you remove that head, then the system falls. But with the Iranian regime, with the mullahs, that's not the case, because it's the apparatus is still intact, that system is still intact. So you could remove the head the same way when Khomeini died, Khomeini replaced him. Today, Khomeini has been eliminated. They say his son is going to replace him. So that system still stands. I mean, I think most people in the West who were analysts, when they were looking at the situation of Iran, no one thought day one of the war that the regime would be able to stand on its feet for today's 34 days since the start of the war. So, no one took that into consideration, but that is something that we understood because we understood the nature of this regime. So with bombing from over the head, this regime is not going to fall. And in fact, right now the regime is playing both the victim card and the hero card for some. So even though it doesn't have popular support inside of Iran, it's trying to garner support from, by international pressure that way. So that is like the situation of Iran. So war was never going to be the solution. And appeasement is what leads to war, because, that green light that is constantly given to this regime is not, it just takes and takes and takes. You reach a point that you've reached the point of no return. But we've always said that there is a solution, and that's the people of Iran and their organized resistance who can bring about change. And I know a lot of people think that, that's naive. You guys haven't been able to overthrow this regime in 47 years, whatnot. But the reality is that they're not taking two things into consideration. The fact that the regime has reached this point that it's so weak is because of that continuous resistance. And the other thing is that what has tied the hands of this resistance in overthrowing this regime has been the policy of appeasement, because we've been used as a bargaining chip constantly. Even today, as we're speaking, I mean, after the execution of these political prisoners this week, I haven't seen a statement from one single country condemning these executions of both the detainees from the uprising and the political prisoners. What is that message to the Iranian regime? The message is like, okay, in the midst of this war, you could carry out, you could eliminate all of those dissidents internally, and no one's going to react. So it's a green light to them when there's no consequences or they're not held accountable. So that is, those are the times that you have to read between the lines and see what is going on the ground. But I think that the people of Iran have shown with their resistance and with, the fact that in Iran, we actually have an organized resistance movement that has withstood the test of time. And I think that's really important. When they say something, it's not just words or just on paper, they've actually shown it. Like, for instance, the 10-point plan that it's it's actually cliff notes of, I guess, the interim government plan that has been put together by the National Council of Resistance of Iran from 1981. But when you look at that 10-point plan, it really does set, a guideline of like how we intend to create a true secular democratic republic in Iran. I think those three words are very key for people to understand, like why they're so important. Secular meaning not a theocracy, democratic meaning not a dictatorship either form, and a republic, which means we're not going back to the monarchy, which was a dictatorship too. We want people's sovereignty. But when you look at that 10-point plan, a lot of, yeah. When you look at that 10-point plan, a lot of people have, like, over 4,000 lawmakers around the world have supported it. Some have called it Jeffersonian because, even though it's 10 points, it has, a lot of bases covered, and it just sets that guideline to make sure it doesn't derail to some form of dictatorship again. And it's for, a 6-month provisional government, and then there will be, a constituent assembly elected by the people to put together the new constitution and whatnot. So, and I think that is one thing that the people of Iran can trust, because unfortunately, I think one of the greatest crimes perpetrated by these dictatorships is, betraying people's trust. But this movement has been able to regain that trust or rebuild that trust, because people have seen, look, if we were after power or position or whatnot, there were easier ways for us to obtain that than to dedicate our entire lives, day in, day out, 24/7 to the cause for freedom. We had a women's conference actually for International Women's Day just right before the war, actually on February 22nd. And there in one of the workshops that we had, it was something was raised by one of the, there's this prominent woman from Italy, I believe, that she said, I was thinking the other day that Mrs. Rajavi has joined this movement when she was 19 as a elite student from Sharif University, which was like the MIT equivalent in Iran. And, she was 19 then, and it has been, to this day, it's over 50 years that she has dedicated every single day of her life to the cause for freedom. And it's not just that dedication, it's like for the last 4 decades, it's been on her shoulders. People are looking at her like, what are you going to do to change this regime? That kind of responsibility, taking that kind of responsibility, that's not something that comes easy. And so when people see that kind of dedication, they're like, that is something that we can trust, And I think that's really important to rebuild that trust and to be able to truly, our main goal is to be able to really transfer power and sovereignty to the people of Iran, because they are the only legitimate, I guess, force that should be deciding on the destiny of Iran.
Do you feel in any way in the current moment slightly stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of gaining support from non-Iranians? Because it seems to me that, again, with so much in geopolitics, nuance has flown out of the window, and many people who are against this war are also waving the regime flag, and others who are very much for the war are saying, we're doing this for the freedom of the people of Iran. And it seems that your organization, your position is a bit difficult because of that.
It is exactly, I mean, exactly as you said, it is very difficult because to navigate that and try to correct that messaging, like, you know what, thank you if you have that, good-heartedness that you want to see people of Iran free, but allow them to take their destiny into their own hands. And the other side is like, thank you that you don't want our people bombed and our country destroyed, but the regime is also destroying our country and our people.
I was wondering
to push
what you would
forward that
say to
narrative
those
is pretty
people. Yeah.
difficult. Yeah. And
'Cause-
so, yeah, the people of Iran, unfortunately, are paying the price for that on both sides. But I think that as we move forward, I think a lot of things, a lot of the smoke screens are clearing now, and people are starting to get a sense of like what is actually happening. And I think as the atmosphere clears a bit, people start realizing that there needs to be some kind of other option, and that third option is now showing itself. And I think it's what's also clear is that it's not only that we are saying that this is the solution. The Iranian regime itself is actually showing that this is the solution, because they're showing what they fear the most with their actions. Like the fact that just in the past month, 8 political prisoners were executed in Iran, 4 detainees, 4 political prisoners. That on normal basis, that's not something that the regime has the strength to carry out, because for political prisoners, there's always retaliation. But the fact that it's doing that even in these circumstances, like even at a time that they're being bombed, they still continue these executions, and they want to spread that fear in society. It tells people like, oh, this is then what they fear the most. And that is the message that people are getting. So it's very important to actually listen to the regime itself to understand like what is the solution. The solution to this regime is it being overthrown by the people of Iran, because at the end of the day, the Iranian regime knows that because it's the #1 state sponsor of international terrorism. Right now, the war has extended to 12 other countries that have been targeted by the Iranian regime, and they understand that they strive on war. That's why they went into the Iran-Iraq war. They extended the war for 8 years. It could have ended after 2 years. All of that, everything that Khamenei used to say during the Arab Spring, people would ask like, why are we intervening in Syria and Yemen and whatnot? And he said, if we don't fight on the fronts in Syria and Yemen and Iraq and Lebanon, we're going to have to fight in the streets of Tehran, Shiraz, and Esfahan. And now the world is starting to understand that concept, because when the regime is able to create crisis in the region or even in the country, it can diffuse like from the attention being brought on itself. But you need to concentrate the attention on the regime itself, and that's why you need to end the war, to be able to allow the people of Iran to do that. But I think we have reached the point that now governments understand, especially after January, that just because in a lot of the statements you would see, we support the peaceful protests of the Iranian people. Well, those peaceful protests, they need to be able to protect themselves too. Do you understand that concept? Now, I think after everything, people are starting to realize that it needs to be a mix of both. We need to have those peaceful protests and large protests, but we also need to allow the people of Iran to fight back and to be able to resist. And armed struggle is unfortunately what is needed against this regime. The regime sets that ground. It's not the people of Iran who, they don't want violence, but this is, the only way that they're going to be able to stop the violence of the regime. And I think these are things that are coming out in a clear, much more, especially like we saw 5 days before the start of the war. There was an operation carried out by 250 members of the resistance units in Iran against the headquarters of Khamenei. And that is the most secure location in all of Iran. And at a time that they were on heightened security because they feared that the war would start any day. And they had 8,000 security forces for that location. But these 250 people were able to enter that area. And that sent a message to people in Iran that, look, the regime is in much weaker position than they present themselves. And this is going to start become the new norm. if we want to be able to overthrow this regime. We need to have both, because at that same time that they were carrying out this operation, there were protests in the universities in Iran too, on campuses. So you have to have both, and be able to move forward with that. And I think that is what we're seeing. We saw networks on the ground mobilizing toward that and for this new chapter, I guess, in this fight against the regime right before the start of the war. So, but with bombs over your head, you have to take shelter. You can't do that. So we would have to see, this war come to an end for people to be able to take the next steps. And I think that, the solution lies in the hands of the people of Iran.
And what kind of end to this war would you like to see would be most beneficial to your movement?
I think the earlier, the better. I mean, it doesn't, because right now, you have to understand, like, last night, the bridge of Karaj was hit, or some of these infrastructures that are being hit. That's going to take like decades to rebuild all of these things. So war, it's not just selective. It's, it has a lot of casualties, and it's so every minute that it stops, it's to the benefit of everyone, I think. And so that's what we're hoping for, that it ends, to be able to safeguard both the people of Iran, the country, and war is never the solution.
And what does democracy actually mean to you?
Well, I think that democracy means people's sovereignty. It means that people are given their rights, that fundamental rights that they've been denied systematically. These are God-given rights for every human being, and that is like the nature of humans, to have these rights in society. But I think that if I wanted to outline what a democratic Iran would look like, I think it's like the 10-point plan set forth by Mrs. Rajavi. So Iran, where the ballot box is the final criterion, where execution and torture have been abolished completely, especially considering our history. Iran, where there's like gender equality and gender equity, actually, first, because it's needed for gender equality, where all ethnicities or religious minorities, they would benefit from the same rights, and having the same, having that integrity in society. You know what I mean? Like the autonomy of the ethnicities of Iran to be respected, or Iran that's in peace with its neighbors and the international community, and a non-nuclear Iran, Iran where there's like a independent judiciary, where we have everyone has the possibility to pursue whatever avenues of they want to, like in regards to their career, their education, and for there not to be any form of discrimination against anyone. Iran where we could see, it's very sad that Iran is the first country, the first human rights charter comes from Iran, but our people are denied those rights that they had like thousands of years ago. So to be able to actually allow Iran to flourish and take its rightful place in the international arena, just imagine, Iran has the highest brain drain in the world right now. Just imagine if these people could actually go and serve their own people. I think we would see Iran flourish really quick, because I think the greatest asset that we have is not our natural resources or this and that, it's our people. And I think that after everything that our people have been through, they really yearn to be able to build that country, and to be able to build that future for the next generations. And I think a lot of people have that ambition right now. That would be like the greatest accomplishment that you could ever dream of, or inspiration in life. And so I think that we could see that flourish, and we hope to see that true democracy soon.
And is there an image that the word democracy or the word freedom conjures in your mind that illustrates its value?
Like the image that comes to my mind whenever I see like free Iran or democracy in Iran, I don't know. It's like, I guess it might be
just
a
to
bit
yourself.
childish at some point.
No,
but,
no, it's
it's like the image that you have from like your childhood, from like what a free Iran would look like. But I always see like the spring in Iran, like and seeing that, like people just being able to celebrate life and prosperous country. And so that is like the democracy that I always that image that comes into my mind whenever I think about it. And just as I guess a fun note at the end, I remember when I have like this vivid memory of my 4th birthday and making a wish on my cake that my wish was for Iran to be free, for us to go back to Iran this year. And I remember afterwards my dad asked me like, what did you wish for? And I was like, free Iran, of course. And he was like, in 6 months, not a year, in 6 months. And he always had that. He always said, we'll be in a free Iran in 6 months. And it has been, since that day, at least it's been 41 years practically. But the fact that every single day and year I have thought of that final, that ideal, to be able to see that for Iran. I think that we are closer to it than ever before. But we hope that we can see that sooner than later, because it really can make impacts in so many lives, not only Iranians, but internationally. So we hope that one day we could be, a country that adds to the stability in the region and peace in the world, instead of being the destabilizing force in the region and the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. And hopefully we'll be able to have an Iran where cranes are used to rebuild instead of being used to take away lives. That is something that we yearn for.
And my final question, and this is a bit of a confrontational one, or at least I want to put you in a confrontational mindset, because you are in a struggle. Do you have a message for the dictators of the world?
Yes. You will all fall. You will fall. There's no doubt in that. Because we only have to win once, but you have to continue to try to stay in power every single day. But there's nothing stronger than a will of a people who wants to bring about change. And this is the path of history and evolution. No dictator has been able to stay in power forever. So your day will come and you will be taken out. So the best would be for you to do so yourself. But take your lesson from history, and you will be remembered in history for your crimes that you perpetrated. And nothing is forever. So your day will come too, and the people will always prevail.
Talking about the people, how can my audience help?
Well, there's a lot that can be done right now during these circumstances, especially. So first of all, raise awareness, learn more, educate yourself about this issue. I know there's a lot of different spins being put on like the situation in Iran, and it just depends like what your algorithm is bringing up for you. But I think it's really important to raise awareness and educate ourselves about what is happening, and to try to raise that awareness also in wherever we are. So to learn more, you could also always visit ncr-iran.org to learn more about the National Council of Resistance of Iran, And about Mariam Rajavi and her viewpoints, you can visit mariam-rajavi.com or mariamrajaviforchange.com. If you would like to be active, because we do have a lot of activities right now in different countries, be it from protests, sit-ins, exhibits, working with lawmakers and contacting, local lawmakers, media, all of that. There's a lot of work that is being carried out by the diaspora right now. So if you are in Europe or Canada, Australia, you could reach out to iranfreedom.org, and they would put you in contact with local chapters. If you are in the US, you could reach out to OYAC, it's Organization of Iranian American Communities. So it's oyac.org, and they have chapters in over 40 states, so you're practically covered there. Please reach out. We really need everyone's help in these very critical times.
Zolal Habibi, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
That's it for this episode of Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight. What struck you most about their story? What surprised you? What did you disagree with? Feel free to let us know in the comments below and we can have a conversation. But if you enjoyed this work, if you made it to the end, then well, I hope that you did. Please do like, share and subscribe. With your help, we can grow this channel and we can get these voices out to more and more people. If you want to support my kind of work financially, then paid subscribers to Patreon or Substack get these episodes 1 week early. Again, that's on all podcast networks and on this YouTube channel. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and always remember, democracy is non-negotiable. Goodbye.